Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We are learning Mishnah Gittin, Parak Daled, Mishnah Daled. Now, we did the first half of Mishnah Daled yesterday. We'll just quickly run through it. Eved Shenishba Ufada'uhu, a slave that was taken captive and then he was redeemed. Im L'Shem Eved Yishtabed, if he was redeemed for the purposes of being a slave to the person who redeemed him from these raiding armies. That's who they redeemed him from. If they redeemed him for the purposes of being a slave to them, Yishtabed, then he is enslaved. Im L'Shem Ben Chayrin, if they redeemed him so that he should be free, Lo Yishtabed, then he's not enslaved. Shimon Gamliel Omer, Shimon the son of Gamliel said, Benkach or Benkach, either way, whichever way that he was redeemed, whatever intention, Yishtabed, he is enslaved to the original master. And as we said yesterday, this was for the purposes of making sure that the slave does not basically surrender himself to the raiding armies in order for him to get away from his first master. Okay, that's what we did yesterday. Now, Eved Shasa Rabbi Apaitiki Lacherim V'Shicharoi, a slave who was designated by his master as an apaitiki. Now, what's an apaitiki? Apaitiki is the following. I'm going to read to you here from the explanation. A borrower can designate a specific piece of property to be payment of the loan in case he is unable to pay in cash or the like. I borrowed money, and I make up with the lender that if I don't pay you, if a time comes that I can't pay you, you don't have to pay cash or whatever it is to pay you regularly, this property is where you collect from. And the lender may then collect his debt only from the apaitiki and not from any other property. That's very interesting. If you make this kind of a deal that this thing is what you're going to collect from, then that's it. That's what you can collect from. I don't know why. I guess the lender is kind of wants to make sure he has, he wants to have some form of payment. He's losing. He's putting himself. Well, it's not a collateral. It's more than collateral, because collateral doesn't say I can only collect from collateral, not from anything else. Usually, collateral, if I have what to pay, you're going to return it. In this situation, what's happening is, now again, here it's a little bit more in the sense that if I guess to make up at a certain time, if I pay you at a certain time, okay, after that, this is what you collect from. This is where you collect from. It's a similar collateral. I'm not exactly sure the difference, but it's a different word. Collateral is called a mashkin. This is called something else. This is called a paitiki. Mm-hmm. And this halach of a paitiki goes so far is that if, let's say, the paitiki gets lost, the lender has nowhere to collect from. Meaning, basically, there is a halacha that if you don't pay back your debt, I can go to your properties. I can go to your land. It sounds like in this case, if you make an apaitiki, let's say a certain object an apaitiki, then that's it. That's all you collect from. And if for some reason something happens to that apaitiki, you can't go to his land. You can't go to his properties. Now, in the Mishna's case, the bar designated his slave as an apaitiki. That is, he told the lender, if he does not pay with cash, the lender can take the slave as payment. That's the situation. Now, what happened next? The Shicharoi. And now, the borrower who owned the slave, who made the slave an apaitiki, you know what he did to the slave? He freed him. He gave him a shtar shichar. He gave him a document of freedom, and he freed him as a slave. So what happens now? What happened to the apaitiki? What happens to the borrower? So here's the halacha. Shuras hadin, according to the letter of the law. Eino eved chayiv klum. The slave has no obligations. Why? He may have been an apaitiki before, and he was a place for a collection before, but that status of being an apaitiki, of being a source of collection for the debt, that fell off once he was freed. If this person is a slave, okay, you can make him an apaitiki. Not a slave anymore, then he's not an apaitiki. Then you can't collect from him anymore. And therefore, according to the letter of the law, there's nothing that the slave should have to do towards this lender who would have been the one to have collected him as a payment if he wouldn't have been freed. But for the benefit of society, which is what the following Mishnayos until now have been talking about, certain laws that were instituted for the benefit of society, Koifen es Rabbi, V'oisa ben chayrin. We force his master to make him a free man. Now, what master? The first master freed him. The second guy never took him as a slave. However, what we do now here is we force the second master, or we force the lender who would have been his master if he would have collected him in time. We force him, v'oisa ben chayrin, and the lender makes him a free man. Now, what that means is like this. What are we concerned about here? What are we concerned about? We are concerned that if, let's say, you have this situation that the slave was made an apaitiki for the lender. The borrower then goes and frees him. The lender may go over to the freed slave and say, "Hey, you're mine, or you should have been. You're mine. You were what I was supposed to collect from, so you're really mine." Now he's really not his because he never collected, but he's going to start basically making problems for this guy. He's going to say, "You're really mine." Now, what problem is that going to make? What's he going to do? Going to go to Bezdin and take him as a slave? It's not going to work. The thing is, though, here's like this. Here's the issue. There's an issue of slander. If this lender says on the freed slave that he's a slave, that you're really my slave, then that's going to slander the slave's children. Now, what does that mean? A non-Jewish slave who has been freed has the status of a convert to Judaism. He may marry any Jewish woman. His children from her are regular Jews. However, the daughter of a slave, even from a Jewish woman, is disqualified from marrying a Kohen. That's halacha. Can't do it. Can't marry a Kohen. Again, this is the child of a slave. Meaning it could be a person who was a slave, married a Jewish woman, child's Jewish. Jewish woman, child's Jewish. Not a slave, the child's Jewish. But the child is a halala. She cannot marry a Kohen. Thus, if the lender claims that this man is his slave, it will ruin the reputation of the man's daughters regarding marrying a Kohen. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want people slandered in a way that they should not be. And therefore, it happens as like this. It says, we force the master, meaning the lender who potentially could have been the master, and makes him free. Makes him free means he writes him a shtar shikhr. He writes him a document of freedom. Writes him a document of freedom to say that I freed him. Meaning there's no way now to slander anymore. Because even if he was a slave at one point of time, he wrote him a document of freedom. And now that the freed slave has a document of freedom from the second master, from the lender, no more slander. Tries to slander him. He says, look, what do you mean? How can you say that I'm a slave? You freed me. So again, this is not really something that has to be done. It's not even something that's really working because there's no necessity for it. But the Chachamim instituted that you do this, that you basically act as if you were actually freeing him and give him a document of freedom in order to make sure there's no slandering of his children. But it doesn't end there. The Kaisev Shtar al Damav. And now the freed slave has to write an IOU to the lender for his value. He basically has to obligate himself that he is going to pay his value to this master. Let me explain why. The contract compensates the second master, the lender, for his loss, since he can no longer collect the slave for his debt, nor can he collect other property from the borrower. Even though the lender has no real claim on the slave, it is appropriate for him to receive some compensation from the slave, since he benefits the slave by giving him the document of freedom. The very interesting idea here. The point here is, now there's going to be a question, we're going to bring this up later, it's going to come up very soon, but at the end of the day, who freed this slave? Who made all the problems? The original master. He made all the problems. And for some reason or another, there's no talking about him. He doesn't have to do anything. The issue here is that part of this whole benefit that we gave the slave, that his children shouldn't be slandered, to say that this guy should go ahead and write your document of freedom, that doesn't go without in some way compensating this other master, the lender. The lender. The lender, look, the lender lost out. The guy freed the slave, the poitiki is gone. He can't even collect from any properties of the original borrower because he agreed to this being the place of collection. So he lost out, and he's benefiting the slave. He's making sure the slave isn't slandered. For that, they instituted, therefore the slave has to obligate himself to pay his value to the lender. That's what the lender lost out on, right? He lost out on the slave who would have been his source of payment. Whether it would have covered the entire debt, only part of the debt, whatever, a part of the debt, the whole debt. At the end of the day, he lost out. He is helping out the slave that they shouldn't be slandered, and therefore we say that the slave also has to go ahead and compensate him. How does he compensate him? He obligates himself to pay his value. Now, what if his value was less than the whole debt? That's life. At least he'll get back part of the debt. And what if it comes out that the debt is less than the value of the slave? Then all you have to pay is the debt. Then you only have to pay the debt. So meaning again, all this is all part of, to say that he's got to pay the whole debt, even if it's more than his value, that the Chachamim, the sages didn't do. So the whole idea here is, and as they write here, the enactment benefits society in two ways. It protects the reputation. It protects the reputation of the freed slave's children, and it gives some satisfaction to the lender to whom the slave had once been designated as payment for his loan. Okay, so that's the first opinion. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Einoi kaisev ela meshachrer. The slave, according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, the slave does not write the contract, rather the one who freed him writes it. Eina kaisev means, we just said before, the slave is the one who writes the IOU for his value. And now Shimon Gamliel says, Eina kaisev, he's not the one who writes any kind of IOU. He doesn't have to pay him anything. Ela meshachrer, the one who freed him, meaning the borrower who originally owned him, he's the one who has to go ahead and pay the value of the slave. He's the one who did it. Now, here we go like this. If the original master, the borrower, has money, require him to pay immediately rather than write up a contract. Mishna speaks of a case in which the borrower does not have any money. So first of all, the first thing they're mentioning here is that he writes a contract. Number one, if the original borrower has the money to pay, meaning to pay the value of the slave, that's what he does. If he doesn't, then he writes a contract. In the case of the slave, the assumption is he doesn't have, because the slave doesn't have anything on his own. No. So therefore, the case that the Mishna used was the slave writes an IOU, writes a contract. Unless we're saying he doesn't have to pay right away. No, basically he pays, as they said before, when he gets the money. Okay, but in the case of the person who's being getting a slave, typically, it doesn't have right away when he's freed anything on his own. So he writes an IOU. In the case of according to Gamliel, that it's the original borrower who freed him. Again, if he has the money to pay, he's going to pay. Otherwise, he writes the IOU. Now, according to Gamliel, since the original owner caused the lender to suffer a loss when he freed his slave, he must pay for the loss. Makes sense, right? Yeah. The Meshachar is the one who freed him. He's the one who made him lose out on this hapaitiki, on the slave, as a payment. The first Tana, however, holds that the original owner is not obligated to pay for having freed his slave because the damage that resulted to the lender came about only indirectly. It's not an indirect damage. It's not like I went and I broke your window. It's not like I took something from you. I freed the slave, which I had the power to do, and that now causes that you have nowhere to pay from. That's called garama, or garmi, whichever wording you want to use. It's indirect. It's causation, and for that you're not obligated, according to the Tanna Kama. You don't have to pay for causation, and therefore, at the end of the day, the one who's going to pay is the one who's going to benefit, which is the one who is the slave, the freed slave. But it comes from Gamliel, no. Even though it was only causing, nonetheless, the original owner of the slave, who was the borrower, who made the whole problem because he freed him, he's the one. Although he's only causing a loss, he has to be the one to pay. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.